A howl pierces the night. The curse of the Baskervilles hangs over the moors. Only Holmes can distinguish legend from truth. Welcome to Revenge Oath. Write in the comments where you are watching from. Your thoughts make everything more alive. Now let's begin the investigation. It was upon a fog-bound November evening when the quietude of Baker Street was disturbed by a most urgent knocking. I had been dozing before the fire with a medical journal across my knee, while Holmes, pipe in mouth and gaze fixed in abstraction upon the ceiling, appeared absorbed in some silent chain of reasoning. The hour was late, yet our visitor's insistence brought no delay. Mrs. Hudson ushered in a man of evident agitation. His heavy travelling cloak was damp with the mists of the street, and his eyes bore that haunted look of one who has lately gazed upon some dreadful sight. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," he began breathlessly, "I have come directly from Dartmoor. It is a matter of life and death. Sir Charles Baskerville is dead." At the mention of that ancient and noble name, Holmes stirred at once, his keen features sharpening with interest. I myself recalled the rumours, whispered tales of an old family curse, of spectral hounds haunting the desolate moors, and of sudden deaths that had claimed more than one member of the Baskerville line. The stranger, whom he introduced as Dr. Mortimer, physician and close friend to the deceased, spoke with a tremor in his voice. "Sir Charles was found but 2 nights past at the gates of Baskerville Hall. His countenance was contorted in an expression of unspeakable horror. Though the official cause shall be put down as heart failure, I tell you, gentlemen, there are marks upon the ground that no natural creature could have made. Great paw prints, larger than those of any hound bred by mortal man." The fire crackled sharply in the silence that followed. I confess my flesh crept at his words, for I had heard enough of that legend whispered among the people of Devonshire, the spectral beast that stalked the Baskerville family since the wicked days of Sir Hugo. Holmes alone showed no sign of alarm. He regarded Mortimer with that piercing gaze which seemed to strip away all obfuscation. "Pray, doctor," said he quietly, "give me every particular of the matter from the last days of Sir Charles's life to the finding of his body. Leave out nothing, however trivial it may appear." Thus began the singular affair which was to test Holmes's faculties to their utmost limit and to draw us into the shadow-haunted wilds of Dartmoor. I bade Dr. Mortimer draw nearer to the fire and lay aside his sodden cloak while I busied myself with the kettle. Holmes did not move from his chair, but his eyes, bright as the coals, followed every gesture of our visitor. When the physician's hands had stopped their trembling and his breath no longer came in urgent puffs, Holmes inclined his head the merest fraction. "Now, doctor, the particulars." Mortimer clasped his long fingers and began, at first haltingly and then with professional precision. "Sir Charles had for some months been in a state of nervous excitement. He spoke often of the family legend, and though he laughed in company, I could see its grip upon him. He complained of a sensation of being watched when he crossed the yew alley that runs from the south door of the hall to the moor gate. He had taken to leaving off his evening walks, but on the night in question, 2 nights past, he went out after supper, as he sometimes would, to take the air and the vapours from his chest. He did not return, and you found him?" Holmes asked. "I was sent for Dawn by Barrymore, the butler." Sir Charles lay near the moor gate, upon the gravel, with his face. The doctor passed a hand across his brow. His face was distorted as though by some prodigious terror. There was no mark of violence upon him. The coroner, a man of sturdy common sense, pronounced the cause to be heart failure. "Yet you come to me from Dartmoor in the dead of November," said Holmes gently, "which suggests that your sense of the matter is at odds with the coroner's." Mortimer's voice dropped. "There were impressions. on the damp path beyond the gate. He paused, ashamed, it seemed, to give superstition the benefit of his tongue. "They were the footprints of a hound, Mr. Holmes, but of a hound such as I have never seen." Holmes opened his eyes fully for the first time. He reached to the mantel with his long arm and knocked his pipe against the grate, not to empty it, but to mark a rhythm of thought. "You examined them?" "I confess I did not follow them." The fog was rising, and the ground sucked at one's boot. But I saw enough to be certain of the shape, and Barrymore saw them as well. The prints were not upon the gravel where Sir Charles fell, but beyond the gate upon the moor path, as though something had waited there. Holmes steepled his fingers. "And upon the gravel near the body, nothing?" "Nothing but Sir Charles's own traces." He had stood for some minutes, perhaps to smoke, near the moor gate. The ash was scattered there, and we afterward found the stump of a cigar in his pocket. He had then, so I deduce, broken into a run. There are longer strides in the gravel, and an impression at the turn where the yew alley narrows as though the toes dug in. He ran toward the gate and fell before he could open it. Yet, Mr. Holmes, I could not find the print of another man. Holmes inclined his head a little to the left. "Nor of a woman?" "Nor of any other mortal," the doctor murmured. Holmes rose and went to the window. Outside, the yellow fog pressed like a living thing against the glass. He stood there a moment, his figure drawn in a single keen line, then returned to the hearth-rug. He took up Dr. Mortimer's hat, which the physician had set upon the table, and turned it in his hands, as a man might turn a coin that held some delicate inscription. "Before we proceed," said he, "permit me a small liberty. You have left your wife at Torquay, where she prepares to move her sister and 2 nieces to a smaller house. You yourself have slept neither last night nor the night before, and you read French medical journals with more attention than English." Mortimer gaped, and I confess I smiled. I had seen such fireworks too often to be astonished, though I never ceased to admire their noiseless accuracy. "My wife is not with me in London," Mortimer stammered. "But how on earth—" Holmes tapped the hat's inner band. "There is a line of fine blonde hairs caught in the sweatband, long and slightly curled, not your own," he said. "Their number tells me you have lately shared conveyance with a lady of close domestic relation, and the presence of flower dust along one edge. See here, Watson argues in an early morning kitchen. The corresponding mark on your right cuff suggests that in assisting with packing or lifting you brushed against a floury surface, which you did not have leisure to remove. Your eyes are slightly injected, and there is a tremor in the left hand when you hold it up. Sleep loss, 2 nights at least. As to French journals, you have chalked the corner of your hat with a triangular smear of printer's ink, coarser than ours, and the one periodical I know in London that uses such ink on its corners is not French at all. Therefore you have been reading elsewhere and carried the habit back." He set the hat down. "Enough trifles. To your Hound," the doctor laughed with the sudden relief of a man whose mind was torn from horror to wonder. "I begin to perceive why they call you the finest brain in Europe." Holmes waved a hand. "Merely the application of ordinary faculties to extraordinary facts. Now, Sir Charles, you say he often stood by that gate. Was it his custom to walk alone?" "Nearly always in the evening. His nephew, Sir Henry, he is due to arrive from Canada within the week, wrote that his uncle's letters had grown increasingly anxious. He urged Sir Charles to seek a change of scene." "A nephew heir, then," Holmes observed. "Fortunate that the baronetcy shall not go a-begging. Tell me of Barrymore, a faithful servant, and long in the family." "His wife, Eliza, is the housekeeper. They both appeared genuinely stricken." "Appeared?" Holmes repeated softly. "And the yew alley, how long is it from the south door to the moor gate?" 200 yards, perhaps a trifle more. The path is gravel rolled upon good soil, shaded by the hedge of yews on either side. Beyond the gate, the ground falls away into a narrow track of peat and gorse before widening upon the moor. There is a stile to the left, leading to a shepherd's path, but Sir Charles rarely ventured so far. Holmes paced once along the hearthrug and back, the very economy of his movement betraying a mounting tension. "You said Sir Charles's cigar stub was in his pocket." He stood and smoked, then ran. Why did he run? "You saw no human prints, the hound prints you placed beyond the gate." The man ran toward where the prints were, not away from them. Curious, is it not? And the expression upon his face, terror. It is difficult to terrify a man with a hereditary legend when he is in the habit of standing calmly to smoke. Mortimer swallowed. Then you do not think—" "I think nothing as yet," Holmes returned, with a sudden, almost merry glint. "I note only that in Devonshire there is at this season a certain reed that when crushed gives off a scent approaching to that of fennel, and that among your descriptions there is no mention of the peculiar smell of brimstone which country folk are prone to associate with hellhounds. We must be careful where the tale ends and the facts begin." The doctor leaned forward. "You will take the case?" Holmes's answer was to strike a match and hold it at arm's length, watching the small flame consume itself to the last bright bead before it died between his fingers. "You say Sir Henry arrives within the week. Telegraph me the hour. Until then I shall require the following: a plan of Baskerville Hall and its grounds, a list of the household with their tenures, and the name of every person who had known Sir Charles's habit of walking to the gate. I would be obliged, too, for precise measurements of the yew alley from door to gate, and the distances between the places where you observed the altered stride." "I can have the plan and list sent by post tomorrow," Mortimer replied. "As for the distances, I can return at once to measure them." "You will do so," said Holmes. "One more question. Was the gate open or shut?" "Shut." "Ah." Holmes's eyes half closed again. Then Sir Charles died with his face toward an obstacle. Mortimer rose. "If there is any danger to Sir Henry—" "There is danger to whosoever profits by fear," Holmes said, "and it is a danger that grows bolder in company. Do not alarm your nephew by whispering of spectral hounds. You will merely arm his enemies with a convenient tool, bring him straight to Baker Street when he lands. Meanwhile, keep your own counsel and your eyes open." Our visitor wrung our hands with fervour and hurried out into the fog, leaving behind the smell of damp wool and the faint tremor of his anxiety. When the door had closed and Mrs. Hudson's tread had retreated along the passage, I turned to my friend. He stood with his back to me, gazing into the coals as though the pattern of their glow concealed some cipher. "You are not convinced of the supernatural?" I ventured. "My dear fellow," said he, "if the devil runs on four paws, he leaves the same evidence as a dog. But I confess," and here his voice dropped into that tone I had learned to fear, for it meant that his imagination had taken the bit. "I confess I smell the hand of a human agency in the arrangement of those impressions. A man may die of heart failure, but not of coincidence. There is method in this terror. We shall see whether Dartmoor holds more than mist." He took up his violin and drew the bow across the strings, but the notes were not idle. They were probes, delicate and insistent, as if he tested the air itself for a response. Outside, the fog pressed closer to the pane, and the street lamps swam like dim planets in a drowned world. Within, the tune rose and fell, and I felt, as I often had, that our quiet room was but the eye of a storm toward which all manner of forces were presently converging. The following morning found Holmes already deep in correspondence. When I descended to breakfast, he was surrounded by maps, charts, and an unfolded ordnance survey of Devonshire, upon which he had been making neat annotations in pencil. His coffee, I observed, was untouched, though the cigarette box lay nearly empty. "You are early at work?" said I, seating myself. "I have been considering the peculiarities of the Baskerville matter," he replied. "A legend that inspires genuine terror, a death that is at once natural and unnatural, and a household of long-serving dependents, each a potential channel for information or mischief. Observe, Watson, the peculiar geography of the place." He tapped the map with the stem of his pipe. "The hall lies at the edge of the moor, with the yew alley running due south. Beyond, the path dips into a hollow before opening upon the waste. Such a position would serve admirably for one intent on unseen observation. The gate is the natural bottleneck, the inevitable end of the baronet's strolls. I confess it is less a gate than a stage, and Sir Charles the actor compelled to appear upon it." I leaned closer, struck by the clarity of his reasoning. "You believe, then, that someone exploited his nightly habit?" Holmes's eyes flickered with satisfaction. "Precisely. Routine is the lever by which a man may be moved against himself. Sir Charles, nervous from the legend, expectant of ill fortune, halts by the gate, as always, and there, what does he see? We do not yet know, but we may be confident he saw something that compelled him to run, something at once familiar to the legend and orchestrated by an intelligence." At that moment, Mrs. Hudson entered with the post. Holmes sifted rapidly through the letters, casting aside tradesmen's bills and circulars with disdain, until his hand paused on an envelope bearing the Devon postmark. He slit it open and spread out a carefully drawn plan of Baskerville Hall and its grounds, together with Mortimer's covering note. Holmes scanned it quickly, then passed it to me. The plan revealed a rambling ancient structure, flanked by outbuildings and surrounded by dense woods to the north and west. To the south stretched the infamous yew alley, straight and severe, leading with grim inevitability to the moor gate. "Note the dimensions," Holmes said. 230 yards from the door to the gate. A man walking at a leisurely pace might take 3 minutes, a man running less than half. The candle of Sir Charles's life flickered out within that brief interval, a curious theatre for death. He rose suddenly. "We shall need to see Sir Henry at once upon his arrival. In the meantime, Watson, let us exercise our faculties upon more immediate trifles. The world, you will observe, never ceases to present instructive details. As if to prove his assertion, a heavy tread ascended the stairs and was followed by a knock. A porter entered with a telegram. Holmes opened it and read aloud, "Sir Henry Baskerville arrived Waterloo this morning. Proceeding to Northumberland Hotel. Expects to call upon you at once. Mortimer." Holmes's face brightened. "The stage gains its principal actor. Come, Watson, we must prepare to receive him." Within the hour, Sir Henry Baskerville was shown into our sitting-room. He was a man of about 30, robust, sun-browned from his Canadian life, with a frank expression that bespoke strength and candour rather than subtlety. Yet there was a spark of impatience in his bearing, as though he were not easily daunted. "Well, Mr. Holmes," he said, shaking our hands warmly, "I'm only newly landed and already find myself in a tangle of mysteries. First, my uncle dead in circumstances that I cannot rightly comprehend. Next, an anonymous warning thrust into my hands as I stepped from my hotel this morning. Here it is." He laid upon the table a sheet of paper, upon which words cut from a newspaper had been gummed. As you value your life or your reason, keep away from the moor. Holmes bent over it eagerly. Interesting, very interesting. Observe, Watson, the crude yet careful assembly. The Times, judging by the type. The words cut with small scissors. The gum is ordinary. The message is impersonal, yet its very vagueness betrays knowledge. Our anonymous friend fears Sir Henry's presence at Baskerville Hall and desires to deter him. "Wouldn't you take it as a warning, sir?" asked Sir Henry with a frown. Holmes smiled faintly. "Warnings are often but inverted temptations, my dear baronet. It is not the moor that endangers you, but those who wish you to believe it so. Tell me, has anything else occurred since your arrival?" Sir Henry hesitated. "It seems a small thing. One of my boots has gone missing at the hotel." Holmes raised his brows. "New or old?" "New. I bought the pair yesterday afternoon. This morning one was gone." Holmes's gaze sharpened to a needlepoint. "Indeed. A missing boot may prove no trifle. For now, Sir Henry, do nothing rash. You are watched, of that I am convinced. This warning and the theft together prove a deliberate interest in your movements. Until we have disentangled the threads, you must act with circumspection. For the present, remain in London. I will make inquiries." Sir Henry, though visibly restive, gave his word, and soon after departed with Mortimer. When the door closed, Holmes turned upon me with the sudden energy of a hound upon the scent. "You perceive it, Watson? Someone fears Sir Henry's return, yet dares not prevent it by open means. The anonymous letter is cunning, but the theft of the boot, that is of supreme significance. Why a boot? Why not some document, some jewel, some article of value? Because a boot is the most intimate of possessions. It carries a man's scent." I started. "You mean—" Holmes's eyes glittered. "I mean that our adversary, whoever he may be, goes beyond mere intimidation. He requires something to complete his disguise or his contrivance. The detail may appear grotesque, but I assure you it is deadly earnest. We are opposed not by peasants' tales, but by an intelligence subtle enough to cloak murder in legend." The remainder of that day, Holmes was uncharacteristically restless. He paced the room, plunged into silence, then burst forth with sudden questions that seemed at first irrelevant. The prevalence of mastiffs in Devon, the nature of phosphorescent gases upon the moor, the habits of Canadian settlers. Each inquiry, I felt, was a fragment of some larger pattern he would not yet reveal. Evening found us once more before the fire. Holmes, having played his violin until the air quivered with restless energy, laid it aside and spoke abruptly. "Watson, I shall accompany Sir Henry to Dartmoor in due course, but I cannot go at once. My duties here detain me. You, however, are at liberty." I looked at him in surprise. "You wish me to go in your stead?" "Precisely. Your presence will serve two purposes. You will provide protection for Sir Henry, and you will send me daily reports. Your eyes may not discern all that mine might, but they will not be idle. Remember, Watson, that details, however small, may decide the issue between life and death. Record them faithfully." Though I felt the weight of responsibility heavy upon me, I could not but feel a thrill at the charge. Holmes, for all his iron composure, regarded me with a seriousness that left no doubt of the peril to come. "Do not underestimate the cunning of our adversary," he said, his voice low. "He plays upon fear as upon a stringed instrument. Yet if we but listen closely enough, we may hear beneath his music the discord that betrays the hand. And when we do, Watson, the hound, spectral or mortal, will be dragged from its lair." He resumed his chair, his face half in shadow, and for a long time we sat in silence, while outside the London fog thickened about the lamps, as though the very city shared in the dark foreboding that now surrounded the house of Baskerville. 2 mornings later, I found myself seated opposite Sir Henry Baskerville in the first-class carriage of the Great Western Railway, bound for Devon. Dr. Mortimer occupied the seat beside him, and I, though burdened with the responsibility that Holmes had thrust upon me, could not help but feel the peculiar exhilaration of being drawn once more into the heart of a mystery that promised danger at every turn. Holmes had remained in London under pretext of urgent affairs, though I suspected that his reasons ran deeper. He had pressed my hand before we parted at Paddington, and said only, "Observe everything, Watson, everything!" Those words echoed in my mind as the train carried us swiftly through the misty countryside. Sir Henry's disposition was bluff and vigorous, yet the shadow of his uncle's death and the anonymous warning weighed visibly upon him. More than once he glanced out of the carriage window with an air of vigilance, as though expecting to see some lurking presence even amid the hedgerows. "It is a queer business, Dr. Watson," said he at last, "and if it were not that I am a Baskerville and bound to the land, I would turn my back on Devon altogether. Still the hall is mine, and I mean to keep it." Dr. Mortimer attempted to reassure him, though the physician's own nerves betrayed themselves in his restless hands. "Once settled, Sir Henry, you will find that the air of the moor strengthens the spirit. We must not permit old wives' tales to dictate the affairs of a baronetcy." Yet his words carried little conviction, for the recollection of the giant paw prints was etched upon his memory. As the afternoon waned, the train drew near to Dartmoor. The sky, heavy with cloud, cast a leaden hue upon the landscape. Rolling hills gave way to stretches of barren waste, dotted with granite tors like the bones of some long-dead monster thrusting through the earth. The air grew colder, and a strange sense of desolation seemed to seep into our carriage. Sir Henry gazed with set jaw, while Mortimer shivered and pulled his cloak tighter. For myself, I confess a shudder as I looked upon the great moor, for its solitude and mystery seemed to brood over us with ill omen. At the small station of Baskerville, a carriage awaited. The driver, a thick-set fellow with weathered features, touched his cap and loaded our luggage. As we rattled along the winding lanes toward the hall, the light fell rapidly, and the moor spread before us in a vast, undulating gloom. The driver, after some hesitation, ventured a remark. "Begging your pardon, sir," he said to Sir Henry, "but there be some folk as says you'd best not walk abroad after nightfall. Strange things has been seen yonder, things best left alone." Mortimer made a sound of impatience, but Sir Henry leaned forward. "What things, man?" The driver crossed himself. "The Hound, sir." "The great black hound. They say it hunts the Baskervilles." Sir Henry laughed, though the sound was forced. "Well, if it shows itself, I'll face it with a good stout stick. Let us hear no more of nonsense." Yet as he sat back, I noted his hand tightened upon his knee. We reached Baskerville Hall as darkness closed in. The mansion rose grim and austere against the skyline, its narrow windows glimmering faintly with candlelight. The carriage drew up before a massive door, which swung open to reveal Mr. Barrymore, the butler, a tall man with a pale, composed face illuminated by the flicker of a lamp. His manner was respectful, though tinged with solemnity, as befitted one in mourning. His wife, a large, gaunt woman with severe features, hovered in the background, her gaze fixed curiously upon us. Sir Henry greeted them kindly and declared his intention of dining at once. While our luggage was conveyed to the chambers, Mortimer departed to his own lodgings nearby, leaving me in the role of companion and guardian. The hall itself was vast and ancient, its corridors echoing with our steps, and its walls hung with the sombre portraits of Baskervilles long dead, The air was chill despite the great fires, and I could not shake the impression that the very stones harboured whispers of the past. At supper, Sir Henry sought to lift the gloom with hearty talk, yet even he fell silent at intervals, as though the oppressive atmosphere pressed too heavily upon him. Barrymore waited with mechanical precision, his pale eyes cast downward, while his wife moved noiselessly about the room. Their gravity, though natural in bereavement, seemed to border on secrecy. More than once I fancied a swift glance passed between them, a glance quickly suppressed. When at last I retired to my chamber, I paused by the window. The moor stretched out under a veil of cloud, and from its depths there rose a strange, low sound, half-moan, half-howl, that sent a chill through my veins. It might have been the wind across the tors, yet it carried a note of wildness that stirred old tales in my mind. I lay long awake, pondering Holmes's instructions, determined to record every impression faithfully. The following morning brought a pale sun, and with it a certain relief of spirit. Over breakfast, Sir Henry announced his intention of exploring the grounds. I accompanied him gladly, eager to view the scene of Sir Charles's last walk. Barrymore declined to guide us, pleading household duties, and thus we set out alone. The yew alley was even more forbidding than I had pictured from Mortimer's description. The dark trees arched overhead in a tunnel that admitted little light, and the gravel path stretched long and straight before us, terminating in the distant gate. Sir Henry walked with firm step, but his eyes roved constantly as though expecting some sudden apparition. We paused near the gate where Sir Charles had been found. The gravel bore no trace now of that desperate run, but the very air seemed haunted by memory. Beyond the gate, the track led out upon the moor. I ventured a few steps upon it, and the vast desolation spread around me. The wind carried with it a faint echo, distant, hollow, and mournful. Sir Henry joined me, his face set. "This was his last sight," he said quietly. "I cannot believe he died of fear alone." As he spoke, I became suddenly conscious of a presence. A figure, distant upon the rise, stood watching us. It was but a moment before he turned and vanished behind the ridge, yet I saw enough to mark the tall frame and rough garb of a man. Sir Henry had seen him too, for he cried, "Who the devil was that? There are spies upon us even here." I could not answer, for my heart beat fast. Holmes's warning returned to me with startling force. "Observe everything, Watson, everything." And so I resolved to note this mysterious stranger, whose watch upon us was too deliberate to be chance. Whether ally or enemy, his appearance deepened the sense that a hidden hand guided the strange events of Baskerville Hall. Sir Henry and I stood for some moments staring toward the ridge where the figure had disappeared, both too surprised to speak. The moor stretched silent before us, a waste of heather and stone that might have swallowed the man without trace. At length Sir Henry broke the spell with an oath. "This is no fancy, Dr. Watson. The fellow watched us deliberately. There are eyes upon me everywhere, and I'll not rest until I know whose they are." We pressed forward a little way, but the moor gave back no sign of the stranger. The ground rose and dipped in folds that could conceal a man with ease, and before long we judged pursuit hopeless. Sir Henry muttered angrily, yet there was nothing for it but to turn back toward the hall. As we walked, I strove to conceal my unease, but inwardly I burned to report the incident to Holmes. It seemed to me no coincidence that Sir Henry, newly arrived, should be so closely observed. The hand that sent the warning letter in London and the hand that snatched the boot might well be the same that now lurked upon the moor. Our return to the hall brought another curious circumstance. As we entered, I caught sight of Barrymore in the passage, holding a candle, though the daylight streamed through the windows. He started upon seeing us and hastily extinguished it. There was nothing remarkable in a servant carrying a light about his business, yet the furtive air with which he concealed it left me with a prickle of suspicion. His wife appeared almost immediately afterward, as though to intercept any question, and together they vanished into the kitchen wing. That evening, after supper, Sir Henry and I spoke long in the great dining hall, our voices echoing among the portraits of grim ancestors. He was resolved to remain at Baskerville Hall in spite of all warnings. "If there is danger, then I will meet it," he declared stoutly, "but I'll not be driven from my inheritance by a ghost story." Still, Watson, I am glad you are with me. Two men can face what would unnerve one alone. It was late when I retired to my chamber. The night was clear, with a moon riding high above the moor. I could not resist the impulse to draw back the curtain and gaze out. For some minutes I saw only the shifting play of cloud shadows upon the waste, but then a faint light caught my eye. It flickered for an instant in one of the upper windows of the house, then vanished. Almost immediately it reappeared farther along, moving slowly as though carried by cautious hands. I held my breath, watching it pass from window to window, until at last it was gone. All was darkness once more. My first thought was of Barrymore and his candle. Could it be that he prowled the corridors at night, signalling to someone upon the moor? The notion seemed wild, yet I could not dismiss it. I resolved to say nothing until I had surer evidence, but from that hour the butler and his wife became the object of my closest scrutiny. The following day, Sir Henry announced his intention of venturing farther afield. He would see for himself the strange country over which he was lord. We set out together, crossing the fields that skirted the hall and passing into the desolate stretches beyond. The air was crisp and the sky threatening, but Sir Henry strode with vigour, declaring that no moor, however bleak, could daunt him. It was as we paused to rest upon a ridge that we encountered Dr. Mortimer, who had come out upon his rounds. He greeted us with evident relief. "I am glad to find you abroad, Sir Henry, but pray take care. The moor has dangers other than its bogs. Only last week one of the prisoners escaped from Princetown. A desperate fellow named Selden, the Notting Hill murderer. The warders believe he is hiding somewhere upon the moor." Sir Henry frowned. "Another peril to add to the list? Very well, I shall carry a revolver henceforth." He clapped my shoulder. "And you too, Watson. We must be prepared." The talk of the escaped convict cast a further shadow over our walk, yet it was not the thought of Selden that weighed upon me most heavily. For even as Mortimer spoke, I felt again that sensation of being watched. The moor seemed alive with unseen eyes. Once, glancing back, I fancied I caught a flicker of movement against the skyline, but when I looked again there was nothing. That night the strange light appeared once more in the upper windows of the hall. This time I stole from my chamber and crept silently through the corridors, following its ghostly glow. I found myself in a deserted wing of the house, where the boards creaked beneath my feet and the air was thick with the smell of dust and age. The light had vanished, yet I heard a faint sound, the quick closing of a door. When I reached the spot, all was silent, and the passage lay empty. I returned to my room with a mind more troubled than ever. Holmes had charged me to observe everything, and now I possessed two facts that clamoured for explanation. The mysterious watcher on the moor and the stealthy midnight wanderings within the hall. Were they connected? Did Barrymore indeed communicate with some ally outside, and was that ally the same unknown figure who spied upon us from the ridge? Sleep came late and fitful. More than once I started awake, certain I had heard a cry borne upon the night wind. Once it seemed to echo with such anguish that my blood ran cold. I rose and went to the window, but the moor lay silent beneath the moon. Whether it was the wind or something more dreadful, I could not say. By morning I had resolved upon a course. I would write to Holmes in full, setting down every detail of these strange occurrences, yet I could not escape the sense that time was slipping away from us, and that each day brought Sir Henry nearer to some hidden danger. Somewhere, upon the vast moor, or perhaps within the very walls of the hall, an enemy plotted, and until Holmes himself appeared, the task of uncovering that plot rested upon me alone. I had scarcely sealed my letter to Holmes when Sir Henry burst into my room, his face flushed with vexation. In his hand he held a boot, the fellow to the one that had so strangely vanished in London. "Watson," he exclaimed, "either my wits are leaving me, or the devil himself plays tricks with my possessions. The boot is found, but not the one I lost. This is the old boot, not the new. I examined it. The leather was worn, the sole patched. It was indeed an old boot of his." "Where was it discovered?" I asked. "In my chamber beneath the bed." "I tell you it was not there last night, for I turned the room inside out, and now the new one is gone. It is witchcraft, man." He threw it upon the floor in anger. The mystery deepened. I could offer no explanation, but the incident filled me with grave concern. Someone had access to the baronet's private rooms and was engaged in thefts that could serve no ordinary purpose. I urged Sir Henry to exercise caution in all things, for it was clear that we were under constant surveillance, whether within the hall or without. That day we walked again upon the moor, this time accompanied by Dr. Mortimer. The sky was heavy with clouds, and the wind carried a mournful note across the heather. As we crossed a ridge, Mortimer pointed toward a distant cluster of stones. "That," said he, "is the remains of one of the ancient huts. The moor is dotted with them. It is said that men lived here in prehistoric times. Some, I believe, still serve as shelter for wanderers." His words brought back the image of the watcher upon the rise. Could he have made his dwelling in one of these lonely huts? The thought lingered with me, and I resolved to investigate further when opportunity allowed. We had not gone far when a shepherd crossed our path. He touched his cap respectfully, and in reply to Mortimer's questions, declared that the escaped convict Selden had indeed been sighted more than once upon the moor. "A fierce man he be, sir, and strong as two," the fellow said, "but he keeps to the wildest parts. Folks say he has food brought him from some place." "From where?" Sir Henry demanded. The shepherd shrugged. "No one knows." "But he's no ghost, that's certain. He leaves his tracks plain enough." This intelligence cast new suspicion upon the strange light I had seen in the hall. If Barrymore or his wife had some secret sympathy with the convict, it might account for the signals in the window. Yet the motive remained obscure, and I dared not confront them without surer proof. That night, as I made my way to bed, I lingered in the darkened corridors of the hall. All was silent, save for the ticking of a distant clock. Hours passed as I kept my vigil, hidden in a shadowed recess, but at last my patience was rewarded. A faint glimmer appeared at the end of the passage, growing brighter as it advanced. I saw Barrymore himself, candle in hand, moving stealthily. He halted before a window, held the light high for some seconds, and then lowered it again. His face was pale, his manner tense, and his every motion suggested secrecy rather than household duty. I followed at a distance until he vanished into his own quarters. My suspicion was confirmed. He was indeed signalling to someone upon the moor. But who was the recipient? The thought of the escaped convict returned with force. The following morning I resolved to test Barrymore's actions further. I confided my discovery to Sir Henry, who, far from being daunted, grew eager to catch the butler in the act. "We shall watch him together tonight," said he. "If he plays us false, we will know it. And if he seeks to aid that murderer Selden, he shall answer for it." True to our plan, we concealed ourselves in the same darkened passage that evening. The house lay hushed around us, the fire in the hall long since extinguished, and the wind moaning through the chimneys. Midnight came and passed before we heard the faint tread of feet. Barrymore appeared, bearing once more his candle. As before, he held it aloft before the window. Sir Henry leapt from our hiding-place and strode forward. "Barrymore, what is the meaning of this?" The butler started, his face ashen. The candle trembled in his grasp. "Sir, I—" he stammered, then fell silent, unable to meet Sir Henry's piercing gaze. "You were signalling," Sir Henry accused. "To whom?" Barrymore wrung his hands in despair. "It is not as you think, sir. It is no treachery. For God's sake, do not bring trouble upon us. My wife, she is his sister. Selden is her brother." The revelation stunned us. Barrymore, seeing our astonishment, pressed on. She could not bear to think of him starving out there upon the moor. "We have left food for him, nothing more. It is wicked, I know, but he is blood of her blood." Sir Henry's anger softened, though his brow remained dark. "You have aided an escaped murderer. You know the risk." Barrymore bowed his head. "We could not let him perish. He has promised to go abroad when a passage can be found. Until then, we succour him." "That is the truth, sir." I could see the sincerity in his voice, and yet my thoughts returned at once to the watcher we had glimpsed from the ridge. If Selden lurked on the moor, he was not alone in haunting us. There was another, of taller figure and keener eye, whose purpose remained hidden. Sir Henry dismissed Barrymore with a stern warning, but when we were alone he turned to me with a grim smile. "Well, Watson, we have solved one riddle. Yet I fancy the greater mystery remains untouched. What say you that we track this Selden ourselves tomorrow night? If he hides in one of those stone huts, we may run him to ground," I agreed, though uneasily. For it seemed to me that each step we took upon the moor drew us deeper into a labyrinth of danger, where the shadows thickened and the unseen adversary watched our every move. The following day dawned grey and heavy with mist, the moor shrouded in a pall that seemed to swallow all sound. Sir Henry was resolute in his intention, and I, bound by duty as well as curiosity, consented to accompany him upon his nocturnal venture. Yet throughout the day I found myself turning over the confession of Barrymore, weighing its truth against the darker suspicions that pressed upon my mind. That the butler and his wife should risk all to aid her brother was credible enough, and indeed it lent a tragic air to their secrecy. But it explained neither the warning in London, nor the theft of the boot, nor the vigilant stranger who haunted the ridges. There was more at work upon this moor than the compassion of a household. Sir Henry, however, was impatient for action. After supper he armed himself with a revolver, and I did likewise, though I confess I was far from sanguine about pitting ourselves against a desperate criminal in such a wilderness. Barrymore, when informed of our design, implored us to abandon it. "He is a terrible man," he urged, "and the moor is no place for gentlefolk at night." But Sir Henry would not be dissuaded. "If I am to live here," he declared, "I will not be held prisoner in my own house. Better to face the fellow and have done with it." Thus it was that near midnight we stole out by a side door and made our way across the grounds. The moon rode high above, silvering the tors and casting long shadows among the heather. The silence was broken only by the cry of a night bird and the distant rush of water through the gullies. Guided by Barrymore's reluctant directions, we struck out toward the western slopes, where Selden was said to lurk. The moor at night is a place of strange and awful grandeur. The great waste rolled away on every side, broken by black crags and patches of treacherous bog that gleamed faintly in the moonlight. More than once we were compelled to skirt wide, lest we sink into the mire. Sir Henry strode on with grim determination, his revolver loose in his hand, while I kept pace at his side, every sense strained for the slightest sound. At length we came upon a circle of ancient stones half buried in the turf, and nearby the ruins of a hut. Sir Henry motioned for silence, and we crept forward. The place appeared deserted, yet the ashes of a fire still smouldered, and a scrap of rag lay upon the ground. As we stooped to examine it, a sound reached our ears, a footfall, quick and light, upon the stones. We wheeled about, weapons raised, but the figure that darted away was fleet as a deer, vanishing into the hollows before we could give chase. Only the echo of his retreat remained, mingled with the cry of some night creature. "By heaven, Watson, that was no ordinary vagrant," Sir Henry whispered. "He moved like a trained man. Could that be our convict?" I was uncertain. The form I glimpsed was tall and spare, with a carriage that spoke of something other than brutish violence. "It may be another," I said slowly. "I have seen a figure like that before, watching us from the ridge." We pressed on cautiously, searching the hut. Within we found signs of occupation, blankets rolled in a corner, a tin of food, a jug of water, and, most striking of all, a bundle of papers tied with string. These we dared not examine in the uncertain light, but Sir Henry thrust them into his pocket. Even as he did so, a sound reached us that froze the blood in our veins. It was a cry, deep and resonant, rolling across the moor like the baying of some monstrous hound. It rose and fell, carrying with it a note of savage hunger that seemed not of this earth. Sir Henry grasped my arm with an oath, and for a moment I confess my courage faltered. The sound came again, louder, nearer, reverberating among the tors until the very ground seemed to tremble. "Good God, what was that?" Sir Henry gasped. I forced myself to steadiness. "It is the wind, perhaps, among the rocks." Yet even as I said it, I knew the words rang hollow. No mere wind could shape so dreadful a cry. We dared not linger. Abandoning the hut, we made our way back toward the hall, glancing often over our shoulders. Once I thought I saw a dark shape moving upon the slope, but when I halted it was gone, and only the moonlight glimmered on the stones. We reached the safety of the house with hearts still pounding, and there in the library we spread out the bundle of papers by candlelight. They proved to be rough notes and scraps of correspondence, written in a bold and somewhat educated hand. The contents were fragmentary, but one fact emerged with startling clarity. The unseen occupant of the hut was no convict, but someone closely following our movements. One page recorded Sir Henry's arrival, another noted our walks upon the moor, and several referred to myself by name, marking the times I had left the hall alone. It was the record of a spy. "Then who is he, Watson?" Sir Henry demanded. "Not Selden, he would scarce trouble himself with such detail. And if not he, then what stranger makes his lair upon the moor and dogs our steps?" I could give him no answer. The mystery deepened with every discovery, and the cry of that dreadful hound still rang in my ears. Yet I could not banish the conviction that somewhere behind all this confusion lay a guiding hand, cunning and deliberate, weaving terror about us as a spider spins its web. I wrote at once to Holmes, enclosing copies of the papers, and urged him to join us without delay. But even as I set down the words, I wondered whether he was not already nearer than I thought, moving unseen as was his wont, watching where we could not, and preparing in silence the trap that should snare our hidden enemy. Sleep was little more than a pretense for me that night. The notes we had discovered in the stone hut lay spread upon the table, their cryptic fragments mocking my inability to piece them together. That some unseen observer tracked our every movement was beyond doubt. That this same watcher had knowledge of Holmes's instructions to me seemed almost certain, for why else should he note my comings and goings so carefully? Yet the purpose of his vigil eluded me, and the dreadful cry we had heard upon the moor still vibrated through my nerves with sinister suggestion. When morning came, Sir Henry was restless and irritable, his temper short with Barrymore and the servants. He spoke often of the cry, and more than once declared his intention of facing the mystery head-on. "If a beast hunts me," he said grimly, "let it show itself in the light of day. I will not live in fear of shadows." I did what I could to dissuade him, reminding him of Holmes's counsel to act with circumspection. But the young baronet's pride was touched, and I feared that his resolve might draw him into peril before we could prevent it. Later that afternoon, as we walked along the lane skirting the hall, we encountered Dr. Mortimer, who had just returned from a distant round. His long face brightened at sight of us, though there was worry in his eyes. "You have heard it, then?" he asked. "The cry upon the moor?" Sir Henry confirmed it, and Mortimer nodded gravely. Others heard it too. "A shepherd swears it was no mortal sound. The folk are muttering again of the curse. They will not come near the hall." At night I asked if the cry might not be explained by some natural cause, a hound escaped from a farm perhaps, or the call of a strange bird. Mortimer shook his head. "I have lived here all my life, Dr. Watson. I know the voices of the moor, and this was not among them. It is said the hound has been seen more than once since Sir Charles's death." Sir Henry laughed, but without mirth. "Well, if the creature shows itself to me, I promise it will not vanish unscathed. I am no man to be cowed by a phantom." He spoke bravely, yet I observed the quickening of his step as we passed the dark belt of yews. That evening, as we dined, Barrymore approached with a message. "Sir Henry, there is a neighbour who has called and asks to pay his respects. Mr. Stapleton of Merripit House." The name was not unfamiliar to me, for Mortimer had spoken of him, a naturalist of some note, who lived with his sister upon the edge of the moor. Sir Henry welcomed the prospect of company, and soon after a brisk, wiry man was shown into the room. He had sharp features, keen grey eyes, and an energy in his manner that betrayed both intelligence and restlessness. He spoke warmly of Sir Charles, whom he had known, and offered such assistance as lay in his power to Sir Henry. "I know the moor better than most," he said. "Its every path and hollow are familiar to me. If you will permit, I shall take you to some of its most curious spots. There is danger, yes, but also beauty, such as cannot be found elsewhere." He spoke with enthusiasm, and Sir Henry, whose spirits had revived under the influence of company, accepted eagerly. I, however, could not shake a sense of unease. There was something in Stapleton's manner, a certain eagerness, almost too pronounced, that set my suspicions stirring, though I could have given no reason for them. The following day we called upon Merripit House. It stood lonely on the moor, a grey, low building with a garden gone somewhat to ruin. There we met Miss Stapleton, a dark and striking woman, with an expression at once proud and melancholy. Her eyes, when they rested upon Sir Henry, softened in a way that did not escape my notice, though her words were few. It was during our return that the incident occurred which remains vivid in my memory. Stapleton had gone ahead upon the path, and I was some paces behind, when Miss Stapleton suddenly quickened her step and drew close to me. "Dr. Watson," she whispered urgently, "you must take Sir Henry back to London. Do not let him remain here upon the moor. His life is in danger." I stared, astonished. "From whom? What danger do you mean?" She glanced nervously toward her brother, who had paused among the rocks, then lowered her voice still further. "Ask me nothing. I cannot say more, but persuade him to leave, if you value his life." "It is the only way." Before I could press her, Stapleton called her name sharply, and she turned away with a look of constraint. When Sir Henry rejoined us, she spoke only of the wildflowers along the path, as though nothing had passed. That evening, Sir Henry was full of praise for Miss Stapleton's beauty and spirit. He declared himself charmed, and I could not but perceive that his admiration was returned. Yet her warning rang in my ears with ominous insistence. Was it genuine concern, or some ruse to deepen our perplexity? I wrote again to Holmes that night, setting down all that had transpired, including the encounter with Stapleton and his sister. I begged him to come to us, for the net seemed to be tightening about Sir Henry, and I feared each day might bring the catastrophe nearer. Yet even as I dispatched the letter, I felt strangely as though Holmes himself were not far away, that he moved invisibly upon the moor, nearer than any of us guessed, waiting for the moment to reveal himself. Sir Henry retired early, but I lingered long at the window, gazing over the dark expanse. Somewhere out there lay Selden, the convict. Somewhere, too, lurked the unknown spy who recorded our movements, and somewhere, if the legends were to be believed, prowled the dreadful Hound. The wind sighed across the heather, carrying with it a low sound that might have been no more than the call of a bird, yet which to my overwrought senses seemed again the echo of that monstrous bay. I shivered, and for the first time doubted whether even Holmes's genius could unravel the sinister threads that enmeshed us. The days that followed were marked by a peculiar mixture of unease and deceptive calm. Sir Henry, oblivious, or perhaps wilfully blind, to the dangers that pressed about him, grew more and more enamoured of Miss Stapleton. He found pretexts to walk with her upon the moor, to linger by the garden of Merripit House, and to discuss the prospects of bringing new life into the old hall. I, compelled by both friendship and duty, remained close at hand, though my watchfulness was rendered awkward by Stapleton's evident disapproval. He hovered about them with a restless vigilance, interrupting their talk, pressing his sister back to the house on the slightest excuse, and regarding Sir Henry with a smile that never reached his eyes. One afternoon, when the sun struggled weakly through the mist and the moor lay pale beneath its glow, Sir Henry and I met the Stapletons upon the path. Stapleton, after a few stiff words, strode ahead, leaving his sister and the baronet behind. I hung back, unwilling to intrude, and thus it was that I overheard Miss Stapleton's voice, low yet urgent. "You must not stay here," she said. "I warned Dr. Watson, and now I warn you. Leave this place while you still may." Sir Henry laughed softly. "And leave you, Miss Stapleton?" "I would sooner face all the hounds of Dartmoor." Her reply was lost to me, for Stapleton had turned sharply and was retracing his steps, his expression thunderous. He spoke with forced civility, but there was no mistaking the anger that smouldered beneath. "Come, Beryl," he said curtly, "we must not detain Sir Henry. There is much to be done at the house," with that he almost dragged her away, leaving Sir Henry flushed and indignant. That night, as we sat together in the hall, Sir Henry poured out his irritation. "The fellow treats her as though she were his prisoner." "It is intolerable, Watson. I shall not be ordered about on my own land. By heaven, if it were not for her, I would have Stapleton know his place in no uncertain terms." I endeavoured to calm him, though inwardly I shared his suspicion that the brother's jealousy concealed some darker motive. Miss Stapleton's warnings had been too consistent, her fear too genuine, to be mere whim. It was clear that she knew more than she dared reveal, and that Stapleton's vigilance was directed less to her welfare than to the preservation of some secret. Meanwhile, the shadow of Selden still hung over us. Reports reached us that the convict had been seen again upon the moor, gaunt and desperate, living like a wild beast among the rocks. Sir Henry grew impatient of the danger and declared that it must be ended. "The fellow cannot haunt my land forever." "If the police will not take him, then we must." It was 2 nights later that the chance came. Barrymore, subdued and penitent since his confession, came to me in secret. "Dr. Watson," he said, "I can bear this burden no longer. My wife and I have sheltered Selden, but it must end. He has promised to leave the country, yet still he lingers. Tonight he is to meet a messenger who will guide him across the moor. If you and Sir Henry go to the stone huts by the crag, you may catch him." Sir Henry leapt at the proposal, and though I hesitated, for I mistrusted Barrymore's motives, I could not refuse. Armed and resolute, we set out into the night, the moon hidden behind scudding clouds and the wind sighing mournfully through the tors. We moved cautiously across the moor, keeping to the paths Barrymore had described, until at last we reached the hollow by the crag. There we concealed ourselves among the rocks and waited. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the rustle of the gorse and the occasional cry of a night bird. Suddenly, from the darkness below there came a sound, the crunch of footsteps upon the gravel. A figure emerged, gaunt and stooped, his clothes in rags, his movements quick and furtive. It was indeed Selden, the convict. He glanced about him, then began to climb toward the ridge where we lay hidden. Sir Henry's hand tightened upon my arm. "Now," he whispered, and we sprang forward. But Selden was swift. With a cry he bounded away, leaping among the rocks like a hunted animal. We pursued him, the moon breaking through the clouds to light our way, but he had the advantage of the ground. We were within a few yards when suddenly a sound split the night, a deep, dreadful baying, rising from the very bowels of the moor. We halted as if struck, for there was no mistaking that cry. It was the same we had heard before, but nearer, louder, more terrible. Selden flung up his arms with a shriek and fled headlong into the darkness. We gave chase, but the ground fell treacherous beneath our feet, and in the dim light we lost him among the crags. Only the echoes of his wild flight reached us, mingled with that unearthly howl which still seemed to quiver in the air. At length we abandoned the pursuit and turned back, shaken to the core. Sir Henry was pale, his lips pressed tight. "It was no mortal hound," he muttered. "No beast of flesh and blood ever gave voice to such a cry. Watson, what are we to make of it?" I could give him no comfort. The moor lay silent. Once more, the clouds closing over the moon, the wind sighing as though mocking our fears. Yet within me grew the conviction that the hound was no legend, no trick of fancy, but a dreadful reality shaped by human hands into a weapon of terror. And until Holmes himself appeared to unravel the mystery, we were but blind men groping upon the edge of an abyss. The dawn that followed our fruitless chase found Sir Henry and me haggard and silent over the breakfast table. The pallor of his face and the heaviness in his eyes betrayed a night spent more in brooding than in rest. Neither of us spoke of the cry until Barrymore, with evident unease, ventured to ask if we had seen aught upon the moor. Sir Henry turned upon him with a sudden vehemence. "We heard it, man, the hound itself." "Deny it if you dare." Barrymore shrank back, his lips trembling. "I have heard it too, sir," he whispered. "God forgive me, but I have heard it many times. It is said to be the sound of death to the Baskervilles, with that he crossed himself and withdrew, leaving us to our uneasy reflections. It was later that morning, as I sat in the library, endeavouring to compose another report to Holmes, that the door opened quietly and Barrymore's wife entered. Her face was drawn with anxiety, yet her manner held a dignity that impressed me. "Dr. Watson," she said, "you are a man of honour. I beg you not to think too harshly of my husband. It was I who urged him to aid Selden. He is my brother, wicked though he is, but I cannot bear the thought of his dying like a wild beast upon the moor." I assured her that I understood her compassion, though I warned her of the peril into which she had drawn both herself and Barrymore. At this, she clasped her hands and, after a moment's struggle, spoke words that startled me. "If danger threatens Sir Henry, it is not from my brother. There is another upon the moor, one who watches. Last night, before you went out, my husband saw the light again upon the hill. He believes it is the man who makes his lair in the old huts. Beware of him, for he is no friend to Baskerville Hall." The significance of this declaration was not lost upon me. I pressed her for more, but she would say nothing further, save that she begged us to protect Sir Henry at all costs. With this she withdrew, leaving me torn between gratitude for her candour and alarm at the picture she had painted. That afternoon Sir Henry insisted upon walking to Merripit House, declaring that he must settle the matter of Stapleton's behaviour once and for all. I accompanied him, though with misgivings, for the moor lay brooding under a sky heavy with storm. We found Stapleton in his garden, net in hand, pursuing a rare specimen of moth. He greeted us with excessive cordiality, though his eyes darted between Sir Henry and myself with a sharpness that belied his words. Sir Henry, impatient of preamble, demanded to know why Miss Stapleton had warned him so urgently to leave the moor. A flicker of anger passed over Stapleton's face, but he smoothed it away with a smile. "My sister is excitable," he said. "She takes these country tales too seriously. Pray do not heed her fancies, Sir Henry. You have nothing to fear." Yet even as he spoke I saw Miss Stapleton at an upper window, her face pale, her hand raised in a gesture that seemed half warning, half plea. Stapleton caught my glance and called her sharply, upon which she vanished. The encounter left me deeply uneasy, and as we returned to the hall I resolved once more to urge Holmes to come without delay. That night the storm broke. Rain lashed against the windows, and the wind shrieked through the chimneys until the old house groaned in its timbers. Sleep was impossible. Toward midnight, as I sat brooding by the dying fire, a sudden tap at the door startled me. It was Sir Henry, pale but composed. "Watson," he said, "this cannot continue. There is a plot against me, I am certain. The warnings, the cries, the strange watcher on the moor, they all point to some hidden hand. We must know the truth, cost what it may." Before I could answer, there came a sound, faint but distinct, above the roar of the storm. It was the baying we had heard before, carried across the moor, but nearer now, fuller, more dreadful. Sir Henry stiffened, his eyes blazing. "There! Do you hear it, Watson? Tell me it is wind if you can." The sound rose again, a long, unearthly howl that seemed to freeze the very blood in my veins. I seized my revolver and moved to the window, but the rain drove against the glass in torrents, and the moor lay hidden in blackness. Sir Henry gripped my shoulder. "This is no phantom. There is flesh and blood behind that cry. By heaven, I will not rest until I have faced it." We stood thus for long minutes, the storm raging without, the dreadful bay echoing again and again until at last it died into the distance. When silence returned, it was more terrible than the cry itself. Sir Henry sank into a chair, his face white. "Watson," he said in a low voice, "promise me you will not leave me alone." Whatever devil haunts this moor, I would rather face it with a friend at my side. I gave him my word. Yet as I watched the storm's fury from the window, my mind turned once more to Holmes. If ever his presence were needed, it was now. Somewhere beyond that darkness a plot was ripening, and the Hound, be it beast or trick of man, was but its instrument. Until the master of deduction set his hand to the task, we remained prisoners of fear upon that desolate moor, our fate hanging upon mysteries I could not penetrate. The storm of that night seemed to exhaust the very strength of the heavens, for the following morning broke with a crisp, cold brilliance that set the moor gleaming under a pale sun. Sir Henry, though haggard from want of sleep, declared his resolve to walk once more to Merripit House. His determination, coupled with his growing attachment to Miss Stapleton, left me with no choice but to accompany him, though I trembled at what fate might await. As we set out, I was startled by a familiar voice from behind the hedge. "Excellent, Watson." "You have done admirably." I spun round, and there stood Holmes himself, his keen eyes alight, his spare figure as composed as though he had stepped straight from Baker Street into the wilds of Dartmoor. My joy and relief were profound. He pressed my hand warmly. "Forgive my secrecy. I have been upon the moor these past days, living in that very stone hut whose notes you discovered. I dared not show myself, for I wished the enemy to grow bold. Your letters, my dear fellow, were invaluable. You have reported faithfully, and now the time has come for the trap to close." Holmes's presence transformed everything. With swift, quiet steps, he led us to a rise from which Merripit House lay in view, squat and grey against the gorse. "There," he said, pointing, "dwells the most cunning villain I have ever opposed. Stapleton is no friend, but a bitter enemy of the Baskerville line. He is in truth a Baskerville himself, the son of a younger brother who fled to South America under a cloud of disgrace. Returning in secret, he laid claim to the estate through stealth rather than law, hoping to drive Sir Charles, and now Sir Henry, to their deaths by means of that old legend." I gasped at the audacity of the scheme, but Holmes continued, his eyes burning with intensity. "The Hound is real, no phantom but a savage beast of extraordinary size, kept by Stapleton in secrecy upon the moor. He has daubed it with phosphorescent paint to lend it the appearance of hell's emissary. Thus, armed with superstition, he has used it to strike terror into his victims' hearts." Sir Charles, already weakened by years of nervous fear, ran until his failing heart gave way. Tonight Stapleton intends the same fate for Sir Henry. At this revelation, Sir Henry flushed with anger, but Holmes raised a hand. "We must let him believe his snare has succeeded. Sir Henry, you will accept his invitation to supper this evening. Watson and I shall follow unseen. When he loses the Hound, we shall be ready." The hours that followed were heavy with suspense. At dusk, Sir Henry set out for Merripit House, resolute though pale, while Holmes and I kept to the shadows, tracking his progress across the moor. The night was clear, the stars sharp against the velvet sky, and the air carried a biting chill. From the house we saw a faint glow of lamps, and Stapleton himself met Sir Henry at the door with outward courtesy. Miss Stapleton, however, looked drawn and anxious, and I saw her lips move as though in prayer when Sir Henry entered. Holmes touched my arm, and we stole to a vantage point near the path that led back toward the hall. "This is the place," he whispered. "Here Stapleton will turn his Hound loose when Sir Henry departs." We waited in a silence that seemed to stretch into eternity. Then at last the door of Merripit House opened, and Sir Henry emerged alone, striding firmly along the path. A moment later the sound came, a deep, terrible baying, followed by the thunder of paws upon the turf. Out of the darkness hurtled a monstrous shape, eyes blazing, jaws dripping flame-like froth, its body gleaming with phosphorescent fire. It was the very Hound of legend, sprung from the pit of hell itself. Sir Henry gave a cry and staggered back, but in that instant Holmes's revolver cracked, and mine followed. The beast rose again with a snarl of fury, then sank at last with a final howl that echoed across the moor. We rushed forward. The creature lay dead, a gigantic mastiff of terrible power, its painted muzzle a ghastly parody of the supernatural. Sir Henry leaned heavily upon me, his face ashen, but his courage unbroken. "By God," he murmured, "it was flesh and blood after all." Even as he spoke, we heard a cry from the house. Miss Stapleton burst forth, her hands outstretched. "You have saved him!" "Thank heaven you have saved him!" But Stapleton himself was gone. In the confusion he had fled into the night. We followed his trail across the moor, but the ground grew treacherous, and in the mist that rose suddenly from the marshes we lost him. Holmes halted at the edge of the great Grimpen mire, where the earth quaked beneath our feet. "He has chosen his own fate," Holmes said gravely. "The mire will keep its secret. No man may cross it by night and live." Our return to Baskerville Hall was in silence, save for the deep breaths of Sir Henry, who walked between us with the steadiness of one reprieved from death. In the days that followed, Holmes laid out the threads of the case with his customary clarity. The theft of the boot had been to give the Hound its master's scent. The warnings of Miss Stapleton were the efforts of a woman coerced by fear, yet unwilling to see an innocent man destroyed. And the mysterious watcher on the moor, Holmes himself, had laboured unseen to weave the final net. When at last we returned to London, Sir Henry accompanied us, broken in health but safe in life, and destined, as Holmes remarked, to rebuild Baskerville Hall without the shadow of a curse. That evening, as I sat once more by the familiar fire of Baker Street, I could not refrain from expressing my wonder. "Holmes," I said, "you have unravelled a skein that seemed woven of phantoms. How could any man bring such lucidity to such a tangled plot?" He smiled faintly, stretching his long limbs. "By observing, my dear Watson, and by never permitting legend to cloud fact. When we strip the impossible away, what remains, however improbable, must be the truth. And in this case the truth was no ghost, but a man who sought to arm himself with superstition." He lit his pipe, and the blue smoke curled upward into the lamplight. "There will always be those who wield fear as their weapon. It is our task to show that reason is the stronger hound," and with that he fell silent, his eyes half closed, while I sat, marvelling once more at the mind of my extraordinary companion, whose genius had dragged even the curse of the Baskervilles into the clear light of day.